To kick off Deer Week 2022, Darron takes down a buck that we've had several years of history with. Join us as Darron recounts the entire hunt. I'm your host, Derek DeBoer. Thanks for joining us.
I need the country. I need the
Meh. He's down. All right, well, I guess we'll kind of start at the beginning of our deer week here. I, quote, worked through Friday noon. I don't know how productive I was the last couple of days, but I had to run a few errands on Friday and get some stuff out for work. But then I headed up to the farm about noon or maybe a little before, and backing up, I guess, a day. So coming into our deer week, we had a couple of days of just really, really warm weather. I think Thursday it was in the 70s, at least it was in the city. I don't know if it was up here at the farm, but I think pretty close. So warm and really, really hot. And we'd kind of been kind of the way it had been, I guess, for a good chunk of late October. Is I hadn't had too many cold spells. But Thursday night and into Friday morning, a really big front came through, and it hit the farm first, being out to the west here a little bit, and the temperature dropped and it rained for, I don't know, most of the day, right?
Yeah, it started overnight and pretty much rained all day.
Yeah, and so when I left Kansas City, it was just starting, so 11 or noon it was just starting, and then I drove a couple hours through it, and I could just watch the thermometer in my truck drop. In fact, down around between Wamego and Manhattan, there was a bunch of snow on the side of the road. It was real slushy, but so it rained for most of the day and got pretty cold, which was really exciting, right? Because that's what you want, is these fronts to move through, and that's really gets the deer up on their feet, particularly this time of year. So I was super excited, and I didn't have a whole lot of plans. Derek and I kind of talked on the way that we'd probably try to get out Friday a little bit, because you had the day off, right?
I did, but because of the rain, I stayed in and I was babysitting our son, and so I was going to have to wait till pretty late until I got a chance out. So we kind of talked and decided, well, you hit the farm, get ready, and you pick a spot where you figure you have the best chance of seeing something. So
yeah, and we had a couple of places in mind, and we'd kind of wanted to hit. Also, neither one of us are opposed to hunting in the rain a little bit, but this was heavy, cold rain. This is like you're soaked before you even get halfway to the stand kind of rain. So nobody wants to do that when it's mid-30s and just dumping rain. So we decided, well, once it finishes, we'll try to sneak out in the evening. And we had a couple of spots we picked out that the does had been hitting pretty hard in the evenings, coming to some green food, and we talked about that on one of our last podcasts, I think, the food plots. So I got to the farm. It was probably 2:30 or 3 or so, and kind of started unpacking stuff. And in the middle of doing that, my phone started bleeping off alerts that the Tacticams were sending pictures. And sure enough, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the does were already in front of some of the cameras. So, oh shoot, well, that throws me in a big panic, right? Like, I'm behind, I need to get out there now. So I threw on my camo and grabbed all my junk and started heading toward one of the stands, place we call the Knob, up on top of the hill, and there's a nice little green food plot there, and we'd been seeing does and bucks out there pretty regularly. Downside is there's a lot of fresh bare dirt around some of it, so slop through the mud getting out there, and half trotted, because I was in a hurry. I didn't want to miss it. The rain had stopped, but the wind from the north was just blowing pretty hard. I don't know, maybe 20-mile-an-hour gusts at some point. So it felt pretty cold, and I realized about halfway into the stand that I didn't have enough clothes on. But I knew that since the rain had stopped and the deer hadn't been moving basically in nearly 24 hours, they were going to be up on their feet pretty quick. So got in there, got up in the stand about 3:30. Not long after, probably half an hour later, started having had two does come in first, come and check the food plot. Had two different groups of turkeys come by. There's a group of 5 and a group of 13, so that got me all excited. Hey, we're already seeing stuff. And a little while later, another group of 2 does, well, I guess a doe and her fawn, came through, and they all went real close by the stand, just ideal where I want them to go. And so already amped. I was, seeing deer. And just a little while later, same trail, 2 little bucks, I guess, I don't know, year and a half, 2.5-year-olds, came up the trail, kind of following the same path as the does and showing some interest, and we're milling around a little bit. And the place we have this stand just off to the left a little bit, there's a tripod feeder that we had set up there, and had actually been over the hill for on another field for a year or so. But this summer we decided we wanted to move it, so we moved it up there. And I don't think had we even ever put anything in it?
I put about half full when I set it up.
Okay.
And then we just let it run empty. It's actually in a pasture that the horses can have access to, and so we just let it run dry so they didn't get a hold of it and make a mess. So and it's been 2.5 weeks or something like that since it had any corn in it.
Yeah, so there was a feeder sitting there, and then there's a mineral lick up in the corner with a camera on it. And we've never really hunted like feeder sites or anything, because when we're trying to find the bucks, when they're searching, they're not interested in the feeders, and really we're just feeding the raccoons, right? So the idea is to get that feeder up there, and then late in the year and the winter when it gets cold, having some food, something to go to. Anyway, got sidetracked there, but off to the left, kind of in my shooting lane, we do have a feeder set up there. So I was kind of watching that, and all the deer as they went by would kind of look at that and check it out a little bit, see if, hey, by chance we put them any corn out there, and we didn't. But so the little bucks came up, and they were milling around the feeder, sniffing it. Then I noticed all of a sudden they got kind of antsy and started looking back down the trail again, and that's a sure sign that something else is coming, right?
I love it when that happens. They pick their head up and they kind of take a side step, like, let's find an exit strategy here.
Yeah. I really like it when the does do it, right? They drop their heads down and start looking around like, oops, something's coming. But when another buck does that and starts looking antsy, you're like, oh boy, this is gonna get good. So the minute I saw them doing that, I flipped on my my GoPro. I actually had 2 GoPros there, one pointed off each side, so I didn't have to mess around with it. I flipped on the one on that side, kind of up and above my shoulder, and turned on the Tacticam on my bow, and because I didn't know what it was, but we were gonna be something coming up there. And so the trail they came up comes up from a creek bottom, and it comes up pretty steep hill, and it's really brushy all the way up until it gets in this clearing, and you can't really see anything there until it's up on top of the hill. But I was staring a hole through the tree limbs there, and sure enough, there's antlers coming up there. And he wasn't even up the hill all the way, and I could tell just with my bare eyes from 50 yards away that it was this buck that we had been calling the broke beam buck. I've since renamed him Scar, but I could tell it was him. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that's the buck, and we were pretty sure we were going to see him at some point. But I had no idea that 2.5 hours, my first Friday set, he was going to be right there. So he was following the same trail up as all the rest of them, and it's amazing. I'll link the video at some point. You see his 2 young bucks kind of milling around, and you see this older buck, and he looks twice as big. He looks like a Clydesdale coming up the hill, and he's doing that posturing, aggressive look where he's moving real slow and kind of sidestepping with his neck down and just glaring a hole through these other two little bucks, and they get all antsy and kind of start milling around. And so this older one comes right up to the top of the hill and by this feeder, and luckily I had ranged it before. I think it was 25 yards to the far side of it, and I didn't give him a whole lot of time, but he was distracted with these two younger bucks. Just perfect broadside, didn't have to stop him or anything. He was trying to intimidate them, so it was just all muscled up, and just waited for him to get stopped there and watched him just a second to make sure he was clear, and drew back and let him have it. I think about 25 yards. He made perfect thump sound of the arrow, and it didn't get a pass through, but there's a good chunk of it sticking out, and he circled around a tree and bailed off the top of the hill there and immediately heard a crash, and so it's pretty sure that was a good sign. Texted Derek right away, and I'd arrowed one and waited a little bit. I didn't have really any doubt that it was a good shot. I would have liked to see it pass through, but it made that right sound, when you have a good hit. So waited 10 minutes or so and got down and kind of walked around. Didn't really see any blood for the first 20 yards or so, and then found the arrow that he broke off. Just must have been from his shoulder pinching it and snapping it off. And then a little bit more blood after that, and he went into the trees, and it was getting pretty dark at that point. So this would have been about 6 o'clock. Sunset was I think 6:30, but it was still really cloudy from all the storms coming through. So by 6:15, it was getting pretty gloomy, and I was having a hard time seeing the ground anyway. But you get into the dark cedar trees, and then it's really hard to see. But I did find some blood, and then just peeked over the edge of this hill and saw a white belly sticking up there. And I didn't go down pick him up or anything, so I knew Derek was coming up. So just left him there, but was super relieved that it was a good shot and he didn't make it too far. I was actually really happy he didn't make it too much farther, because it's a real steep hill right there, and had he gone a little bit more, it would have been a heck of a drag getting him out of there. So
yeah, there's not really a good way to get him out if he'd have gone to the bottom, because there's two creeks that kind of converge there at the bottom, and pretty steep banks. So I don't know how we'd have got him out if he made it all the way down, but luckily.
Yeah, if he would have made it down the bottom of the hill, it would have either been a killer drag up 100 yards of hill or across a couple of really deep creek gullies. Neither one of those would have been terribly fun. So I'm glad he got the way he fell. It actually looked like he got his antlers hung up in a cedar tree, so it kind of flipped him over, and he was laying a little awkward. But I'm glad he didn't make it real far. So super excited to have an encounter with him and be able to get a shot, and I hadn't ever imagined that it would happen that quick. But
I don't know if you remember, but you actually called this a couple weeks ago. You texted, and we were getting a bunch of pictures of him. He became real visible, I'd say mid-October.
Yeah.
He started showing up on a lot of different cameras, and you texted and you said something to the effect of, this guy's going to get thumped in a few weeks. And
yeah,
he kind of called you a shot there. I wasn't expecting it on the first evening either, but it kind of makes sense as much as he was moving around and pushing other deer around.
Yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit, but it almost seemed like he became the dominant buck right there in that area. There's a couple of other, frankly, bigger, better scoring deer. I don't know body-wise any bigger or any older. Couple of bigger antlered deer around there, but this guy was just everywhere. And we have pictures of him fighting with some little bucks, and all the time he just looks super aggressive. Not like he's just moving through, but like he was, really holding down his territory. So pretty excited that we're able to see him make that happen. I've had a couple of, this is actually my my third first day buck. It's weird. I either tend to have incredibly long seasons or incredibly short seasons. This is my second shortest one. My absolutely shortest one was a morning and shot one within an hour of being in the tree. But the thing is, those other two first day bucks, we had basically no history on them as far as, routinely seeing them. So this felt really good. And I think we had kind of talked about it on our last one, that we felt really good this year having a couple of bucks that we felt like we had, we knew what they were going to do. So just getting that right day in that right place. Frankly, it was a complete luck of the draw that I was in that stand, right? I didn't know for sure that's where it was going to be, but I knew the weather was right and a pretty good odds that, the deer were going to be hitting some food. So,
but we did some things to make that decision easy. I mean, just setting up the food plot with what we've seen. And I don't know why it's taken us so long to focus on that field for an evening spot during the rut, because there's just always deer up there.
Yeah.
They end up there. So there's some things we did on purpose, and this is kind of a milestone deer in my eyes. Again, it's one of the first bucks that we kind of scouted out, we've had some history with, and made a play on. He's one of three that we have regular pictures of that we'd like to get. There's probably 3 or 4 other ones out there we're just unsure of. We've seen off and on, but he's one of the regulars. He's kind of a farm deer there, and so that's really exciting that this season kind of made it happen. And we were unsure last year, or I was anyway, how old this deer was. We had some velvet pictures of him earlier on, and he looked decent, but then he snapped his beams off.
Yeah.
So you would think, well, maybe he's just a lighter, he's not got a lot of mass, so he's a younger deer. But now that I see him in front of us with the mass he's got, he's at least a year older than I thought he was.
Yeah.
Based on last year.
So in 2021, like you mentioned, we'd had some velvet pictures, which I need to go back and try to find because I didn't dig those out yet. But once we started actually hunting, late October, early November, you might recall this differently, but when I was in the stand, I kept seeing from a distance what I thought was just this weird spike deer. There was a buck, he looked big, but when you look at him, he just had 2 great big gnarly spikes coming out of the top of his head. And we have a couple of really good trail camera pictures where he's working his way up the hill, and it's obvious in the pardon me, obvious in those that it's this buck because he's got these really, not real tall, but thick double brows on both sides, and you can see he's snapped his both beams completely off. And the other thing that you notice, particularly in the trail camera pictures from the fall, last fall and this fall, is he had a great big long scar on the right side of his nose, kind of going the whole length of his face. Last year even, just super gray in the face, super wide face, real white nose, real gray face, and the same again this year. So I'm not great at aging deer, but I would not be the least surprised if he was at least 5.5 years old. Looking at the size of his bases and looking at the, some of his features on his face and coloration and stuff, and then just looking at the sheer size and proportions of him compared to the 2.5-year-olds, enormous chest and neck compared to the rest of them. So that's my guess. I may be off, I don't know, but
it's kind of maybe weird for me to observe this, but a lot of mature bucks are big bodied and have big necks and stuff. But if you go back and look at the pictures, and I've got some video of him last year too, he is just so well defined muscularly, and he was a big body deer. He had some fat on him too, and I have a kind of a funny story about that. But that just stood out.
Yeah.
In all of his pictures, he's just big old muscular buck all through the summer, and he, like the way he postured in your video, you'll see just his stance. He was king there. So just a phenomenal deer.
Yeah, and so it's pretty cool. There's no hope of ever finding his sheds from last year, but that would have been really neat to have these little busted off nubbins or the beams that he broke off. But then coming into the spring and summer this year, he showed up on the far end of our farm, and we got to watch him put on antler all season long. I mean, we were getting pictures of him at least once a week, if not, 2 or 3, 4 times a week from basically May through July, I would say. And he's heavy enough and has enough points on his beams that's just huge, massive velvet. You could you could tell he was going to be a heavy rack deer by how ridiculously beefy the velvet antlers looked. So that was really cool to be able to watch him put on antler growth all season long. And then I was really hoping we'd get some pictures of him, in the process of shedding. But right when that kind of happened, so I don't know, mid-late September, I suppose, he just disappeared off of the one end of our farm. And I don't know that we've gotten any other pictures, maybe 1 or 2 from that end of the farm of him after middle of September when he moved to the other end. And then we started getting pictures of him there. So it's really interesting.
So just in distance, that's about a mile.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, he flip-flopped the farm. So that's not huge, but when you're strategizing,
yeah,
it
right.
Makes...
So, if you just had one set of pictures, or, one small data set, I would have been sitting on a stand at least a half a mile from where I, shot him this year based on the number of pictures we had of him all summer. I figured, well, man, he'll be by there any day. But as far as I can tell, he never went back over there, which is really cool. And it's not at all uncommon for deer to do that. Have their summer territory, and then they move their off and move into their fall grounds. But it was really neat to be able to recognize and see that happening with all the information we had on him. So again, that was pretty cool, knowing that we kind of had an idea of what he was doing.
Yeah, right about that time. So he flip-flopped, and then he kind of went away for a little bit before we started getting pictures on the other end of the farm. And once he showed up there's one camera, that spot you can see the camera from a ways off if you're real careful. And I was out at the farm one evening, and he was in front of that camera, and I thought, I'm going to sneak through this little ravine and behind the trees and get a look at him, just watch him for a little bit. It's at the edge of a CRP field, and I found him, and out in the middle of the CRP there was a doe. And this was before chasing, but it was kind of cooling down. It was after the kind of that first cold front of October. And he was at the edge, kind of munching around. He lifts his head up, he sees that doe, and he goes booking it out across the CRP toward her. And he gets about halfway to her, and he just slows down like, oh, I am not in shape for this yet. And sniffs the air a little bit, sniffs around, and then trots back over and starts eating again. And I thought that was pretty hilarious. He had a little ways to go, but since then, he started showing his dominance. We got some pictures of him fighting right in front of a camera, working some rubs and scrapes and pushing other deer around.
Yeah, and again, I don't know what he scores and I don't know what he weighs, but I know that if I had been there by him myself when I shot him, he might still be there, because there was no way I was going to be able to pull him up the hill by myself. So thanks, Derek, for helping me with that. These big bucks are so enormously heavy right now that, man, I see stars when I start having to pull them any distance. And don't hurt yourself, fellas. Get some help.
Well, the crazy thing too is he crashed into the cedars. And when you think about Kansas cedars, a lot of times you picture, the 8 to 10 foot tall cedar trees dotting the prairie landscape, kind of encroaching the grass. Well, ours are big, fully grown, mature cedar trees. And then the smaller ones, some of them we cut so they fall down, but the smaller ones usually get shaded out and die out and then crisscross. And so then you're humping them over these big logs and stuff. So you're getting constantly tangled up, and it's kind of a trick. But
so I'll take part of the blame on that, because part of our deer improvement program this last summer, I kind of went around this area on this hill. Well, you and I both did, and cut a bunch of cedars. And this exact spot where he went and piled up, I started cutting trees back. And I'm not great about how I angle my trees where they fall, and sometimes the cedars get hung up and stuff. So it was kind of a crisscrossy log jam of all these cedar trees that are the main trunks are now laying 18 inches off the ground, so there's no, I can hardly step over them and walk, let alone drag a deer over top of all these things. And about ready to go get the saw and clean it up some more, but it was a little bit of work getting him out of there, but then cleaned him up and our pictures and hung him for a little while, and now he's most of him's off getting processed.
I got to ask you, what was your first thought when you recognized him coming up the hill? I mean, what was that feeling like? Recognizing a deer that you've watched all summer on pictures, and there he is already the first night.
It was really weird because this is one of my better bucks I've ever shot. Probably the least excited when I saw him, or least, not, I don't want to say excited.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yes, least shaky, least, worked up, least surprised. It was like, I know that buck, this is going to happen right now. And there was no doubt, there was no surprise in it. It's like, of all, actually the most surprising thing to me out of the whole thing was, man, I can't believe this happened so quick. What am I going to do now? But it's like, this was one that we picked out that it was going to be a shooter, and it happened right then. That's what was going to happen. Afterwards, I kind of felt bad. I was like, man, I probably could have watched him for half an hour and got a bunch of pictures and videos and all that stuff, but I've messed around enough times in my life and let things get away from me that wasn't going to happen. So
yeah, and that's not really the point of all this anyway.
Yeah, right.
To get this deer down and...
Yeah, well, and it was like, what more do I want, right? We have hundreds of pictures of this deer. I'm not going to gain anything else from letting him parade around a little bit. And honestly, I wasn't terribly worried about him, winding me or spotting me or anything. But there were already two does off to my other side, and these two little bucks that were now antsy and running around. I was kind of afraid one of them was going to freak out and take him with them, but it worked out pretty well. So super excited about him.
Yeah, I love getting those texts. I think you said
Yeah.
I got an arrow in a deer, and by that you're not sure if you got the deer down.
Yeah.
But pretty confident. And that was the first deer with your new bow, is that right?
It is, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly one shot out of the tree stand and ruined an arrow and ruined a broadhead, and not at all disappointed with it. It's kind of crazy because really in that stand, there's not many places to shoot out of. Off to the left, really, you could only shoot about 25 yards. If you shot off to the right, I suppose you could shoot as far as you wanted to, but there's not a huge lane, so I didn't even adjust my sight. I've got a 4-pin, but fully adjustable sight. I just left it on 20 and let her eat. Worked real well. Did break an arrow off, and actually So I found the arrow and like, well, I guess I broke another one. And then when we pulled him up the hill and got him on top and we're looking on his opposite shoulder, just the very tip of the broadhead was sticking through the skin. And I think you just reached down there and plucked it out and just pulled it right through. So it must have clipped a little bit of his far shoulder, as best I can guess. And actually looking back at the video, the exact second I shot, he takes half a step forward and opens up that close side. So it didn't hit that near shoulder for sure, but it must have just got the far one right in the middle of the body. You can take all the heart shots you want. That's fine. I'm going to give myself a little room for error and aim for the double lungs. And so it's crazy how fast he went down with that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, trying to think anything else interesting about him. Euro mounted him. I really like the Euro mounts. I've got the process down pretty simple now, and it's fun to have them and be able to hold them and pass them around. Nothing against any other mounts, but kind of like these. I guess I'll have a short video at some point. I got to get that pulled together and see what else is going on. Oh, did want to, so there's not a whole lot more story about this deer, but did want to, one thing we had touched on our last chat was getting the kids out. So my wife and 2 kids, they came up that evening too. They were a couple hours behind me because she had to work a little later, and then the kids got out of school. So it was dark by the time they were in the area. I called them right away when we found the deer and asked if they wanted to come out, but it was dark and wet and it would have been quite a mess. So they declined, but the next evening I got to take my son out to the tree stand. We have a couple of 2-man ladder stands, and it was actually one that he'd kind of helped me put together a few years ago out in the driveway when he was real little. I don't know, he'd probably been 3 at that time. So this was his, actually both their first chance to get out in the deer woods, and they were super excited. I only have one set of camo, but they're about the same size, so they had to share. So I took Hudson out Saturday night for a couple hours, and kids at that age are pretty excitable and bouncy, and it's kind of like, well, what are we going to do to entertain him for a few hours? So I have 2 GoPros, so I gave him one, and it's like, here, you can record stuff. So he spent 2 hours in the stand kind of waving around, and I haven't looked at all of it, but most of it's pointed into the sun or into his nose or something. But you kind of have that chat with him beforehand. Okay, well, if when we're up there, we got to be still, and we got to be quiet. You got to use your whisper voice. And he did pretty well for being still, but I seem retrospectively, I failed to clarify what I meant by being quiet. I kind of only explained, I guess, that, you had to whisper if you had something to say. And I missed the whole point about only say something if it's urgent or relevant. So he kind of did his normal chatting for 3 hours straight, but in a whispered tone. So by the time we talked about the horses and the creek and the trees, and then we were on to math problems and whatever else, but he did awesome. Next morning, took Jaylee out. So it was dark when we got out, and a little bit colder. And it was actually one of those days where it wasn't super cold, but where you get nice and warm walking in. So the first hour in the stand, you're warm and it's nice. But just right when the sun starts coming up and it's damp and the breeze picks up a little bit, you get cold for a little bit. And those of us that hunt know that you make it through that hour and the sun's going to be up and it'll be just beautiful again. But she couldn't handle it any longer, so we only got a couple hours, and that was fine. Hudson got to see a little buck chase a doe around, and he thought that was pretty cool. And Jaylee got to hear all the owls and the birds screeching around in the morning and drew pictures of all of them. And then we went and drove around, and she saw some does out running around. So they had a great time. So super excited they got to go out.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You packed all that in one weekend, made the most of it. It was really fun because that Friday night you'd already shot a deer, and we got together here at my place. So our kids and spouses got together and kind of had our own little deer camp, and hopefully a start of a kind of a tradition. And
yeah, no, that was really good. I was actually a little selfishly worried. Like I really wanted to get the kids out. I mean, they're old enough now, and they showed. I've never. With whatever they do, I've never said, hey, you're going to do this because I want you to. No matter what it is, it's kind of, I'll offer them the chance. And if they're interested, then I'll support them. We can go do that. That's awesome. Whatever it is, what scouts or dance or hunting or fishing or whatever, I'll give them the chance. And if they're interested, yep, we're going to do it then. And so it's like, yeah, they showed interest. So I was super excited. This is the first time they wanted to go do that. But also in my mind, I was like, there's some big deer out there that I don't want to mess this up. So I want them to see some deer, but also like, I don't want to ruin this. That was me being selfish, but it worked out really well. So got all that packed in a couple of days, and now I've just been kind of hanging back and trying to scout from a distance and get Derek on some information and get her done.
yeah, the deer are about 12 hours off.
Yeah, we they're still moving, but we've had a couple of warm off days here in the middle of the week, and it looks like it's going to change, but they're still out and moving.
It's really great. It's really the first year in 5 years or something that our time off and the weather and movement and all of that's actually coinciding. So I can't complain about 2 days of slower movement, and really it hasn't even been that bad. Tomorrow might be warm, but
it's been kind of crazy though, because the past couple of mornings, I guess, you get up early and you check the cameras on the phone, and it's like, yep, there's a big buck right there right now, but I can't even get out there for another hour. It's like,
yeah, right where you need to be, and then you're afraid to sneak in there without bumping him out. And one of the things I need to figure out is what is different about this deer and why he was so much more visible in daylight, especially recently, versus these other deer. If he was just that much closer to home, if he bedded up right there, or what the case might be. Because the other ones are just hanging back and content with running around at night. So I don't know exactly. Maybe they have to travel a ways before they get to the fields or the scrapes or whatever.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting too. I don't know what it is because there's a couple other ones also that we watched all summer long, but now their fall core area must have shifted off the farm enough that they're not bedding right there. I suspect this buck here was bedded, a couple 100 yards from the stand. There's some great areas there where I know they bed. I suspect he was just in there hunkered down during the storm, and that would make sense why we'd see him in that area a lot. I was looking forward to finding his sheds next spring.
Now you got him.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to look for something else now. Worked out real well.
He's kind of a stereotypical DeBoer farm buck anyway. It seems like the double brow tines is something that's been passed on for years and years. I can remember so many deer having that characteristic.
We've got a lot of them, and it seems like when they have the double brows, they don't get real tall, but they're kind of webbed in between them, and we have those a lot. The other thing I'm really happy about is he's got a couple of just little extra. Well, he's got one, I don't know, little 1.5 to 2 inch little kicker thing right above his eye that pokes off, and then another small tine on his right side, and they're not real sturdy looking. And I was sure the instant I saw him, the pictures of him fighting with those other guys, that those points were going to be busted off and gone, but they're still there, so happy about that.
Yeah, I think if you'd have given him one more week, he'd have been trashed up.
Yeah, that's unfortunately we actually see that quite a bit. I don't know that we have. I think it's more often than not that we shoot a buck and he's got at least one tine, if not more, busted off.
Yeah.
We could have some pretty impressive deer, but almost all of them have a. By the time you get into early November, they've been real aggressive. In fact, looking at this guy, it's kind of neat because you look on his tines and his beams, there's a lot of scratches, deep gouges in there where I'm sure it's not from a tree. It almost has to be from another antlers banging into it. So who knows what kind of trouble he'd been getting into.
But he kind of seems like the kind of buck that just probably banged his horns against anything he could find.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure he was responsible for a lot of trees getting torn up.
It was neat, and you lamented the fact that you lose this, but when we were taking pictures, he had cedar shredded up at his bases and on those brow tines. And unfortunately, when you boil it, you kind of lose all those, but that was really cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's a way a good taxidermist could kind of preserve all that stuff in there, but a good taxidermist I'm not, and I do like the Europeans simply for the fact that I can carry them around and get them down and play with them. But yeah, I suppose I can get some cedar shavings and stick them on there later. Yep, yeah, it was a good deer and good year.
Dandy of a buck.
Yep.
Way to kick off the deer week. That's going to be hard to beat from now on.
I'm pretty happy with him, and the other thing is that there's still some other really good deer out there, and even if we shot another one or two of the big ones that we've been watching, there's a lot of potential in some of these young bucks that are still out there. I'm thinking of a couple we watched in Velvet that I haven't seen in hardhorn at all, or very few. Boy, in a couple of years, some of them are going to be special. Hope they stick around.
Yeah, realistically, somebody needs to shoot a couple of those so that the younger ones stick around, because I think they probably just outcompete each other or bust each other up and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's on the upward tick for what we're going to hopefully have a chance at. We'll see if we can capitalize on that. But
yeah, well, and if they want to move off the farm for a couple of months, that's fine, as long as they come right back to that 1 or 2 acres in February and drop their antlers right there, so then I don't have to walk all over creation to find them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, good deal.
Yeah. Yep. I don't have much else to add about that, I guess.